This video is going to look at how to draw a human in correct proportions using a head measuring tool. When we're drawing, we measure people in heads because no matter how tall or short a grown-up person may be, they're always going to be around 7 or 7.5 heads tall because, of course, if they're a bigger person, they have a bigger head and everything stays roughly proportionate. If you're younger than an adult, there are some differences, but we're just going to use adult proportions for the moment because it makes things easier. Kids, 11 and 12-year-olds, are about 6.5 heads tall. We're going to do a 7.5 head adult because the locations end up really lining up very well. So 7.5 heads tall means that if this is the size of your head, from here to here, your entire body is going to be about 7.5 times that size. So we might go about just marking it out first off. Let's draw a human that's just standing looking straight at you. There's one head. That's going to be their actual head. The second head, we'll just make a mark because we need to just know where it hits. So this second head lines up with the middle of the chest, kind of right where the armpits are. That's a good line to be able to measure how far down the arm should actually go. The next one down, this line, is going to be about where the belly button is. Next line down after that is where our legs come apart. It's right where our hips are. We have this hip bone in the side. You can kind of feel it with your hand as you're standing or sitting. You have a kind of a protuberance that pokes out the side where your leg connects up into your pelvis, and that would be your hip bone there. Okay, great. So we've got, so far, 1, 2, 3, 4 heads tall. This is where things become not quite as clear. This marker is right above the knee. This marker is right below the knee. So our knees happen right about in the center of those two lines right there. So maybe right there and right there. Let's just draw on some knees for the moment. That's 5 heads, 6 heads. 7 heads tall, reaches your ankles, and then the extra half of a head is your feet, and then you reach the floor, the bottom of your feet. That's 7.5 heads. This person looks extremely long, right? Compared to some people, if you're used to drawing a cartoony sort of person, with a big head and their features on there doing whatever, and their body is like this. Hey everybody, how's it going? Compared to this person with a very large head, an actual human being, looks very lanky and stretched out. But let me show you. If we need the armpits to reach all the way down to this, then that means that the neck and the shoulders have to take up all this huge space up in here, and it seems exaggerated at this point, but it'll be okay. Another trick that we know is that the shoulders are each about 1 head from the center. So your shoulders actually have to go out that wide, as opposed to this guy, who basically has no shoulders. So if we go back to our person, allow them to have something of a neck that widens out, then go down at a slope for the shoulders, out to the width of the shoulders. Suddenly it doesn't look like this is such a huge exaggerated amount of space anymore, right? So we know that the armpits happen about there. This is where it's going to split apart in that way. Another problem we come into at this point is that in order to make sure the arms are in there, sometimes people draw this torso really skinny And that is not what we want to do. We want to make sure that there's room for this big rib cage we've got in there. This is going to hold a lot of important organs, so it takes up a good amount of room inside of our body. So we got to make sure that the torso of the body allows for the size of that rib cage. When we get down about to the belly button, right above the belly button is where we kind of have that natural waist. This will be the thinnest area of our body, of our torso there. And then it comes out a little bit, depending on who you are. Women tend to have wider hips than men in proportion to their body. So you can come out at some if you need to. The hips, we've already got marked with this head number 4. That's going to be the widest line of the hips right there. We're doing great. And also at the hips is where the legs split apart into the 2 different legs. This is looking like a person, right? We're doing all right here. So as we move down, we want this curve to come down to where the knees are. I just guessed with this knee, so it's in the wrong place, and we're going to adjust that. And let it come down to there. So we've got these kind of big muscles in here, big muscle groups really, that are wider at the top and curve and narrow down as they go, but there's definitely a curve to them. And then below that, we have other big muscle groups, our calves and all this. And this is going to reach down to our ankles. We know where the ankles are right there. And at this point, we just have the feet coming out, widening at the toes. This foot is kind of pointing right towards you. Like that. Perfect. So we have a person. We're missing arms, of course, and we didn't make any measurements for the arms. So what I usually suggest people do is look at yourself. Put your arms straight down. Where do your elbows hit? Elbows hit just about where the belly button is, pretty close, a tiny bit above. So if we know the belly button's there, we can make our elbows go down to that point. Where do your hands go? If you stand up and put your hands straight down, you'll feel with like your wrist or the base of your hand that you're going to feel this bone right in here that we've marked for our hip bone. So those hands are going to start right about where that hip bone is, right there. Right in line with that. We're just going to do some really simple hands for the moment. And we're keeping the muscle structure very simple and basic, but if you just kind of draw things with ovals, allow them to kind of curve outward so that each muscle mass is a little thinner at each end and a little bigger in the middle. The very best thing you can do is look at how people are actually shaped. And all of a sudden, it doesn't look like it's some giant exaggerated person. It looks pretty realistic. And once you add hair on and facial features, that's all great. So the really great part is now that you can draw a person in proportion, you can use this same measuring head to draw a little more action, to draw this person in a better position that works better for the picture you're doing. What if, for example, we want to draw our person riding a horse? We could absolutely do that using these same measurements. So we trace out the head loosely, keep it light because our person now is going to be looking to the side, not looking straight forward. So the nose is going to be on the front like that. And the jaw is going to take on a different shape. And everything's going to be a bit of a different shape. But for now, let's just do it like that. The second head, if you imagine if your person was standing straight, the line to mark that head would be right along there. So now if the neck's kind of coming out the back, you would go from that line down, and this is going to be center of the chest, kind of where the armpits happen if your arms are relaxed like the other person we drew. In this case, the arms might be up a little bit, so it's going to be a touch different. But it still marks the same sort of thing. Next line down is going to be the belly button. And you'll notice that I'm kind of creating a curve in there because our person is riding a horse. They're going to be leaning forward a bit like this. That's the general curve of their spine there. Next, head down. Now this is the hips. This is where the legs come apart. So in this case, with the legs bent up and the person sitting, then this is what they're sitting on. This is their buttocks. It's their sitting spot. So that is where they're going to kind of, this will be the surface where they sit. Now we've come into a trickier position. Because riding a horse, their legs are not going to go straight down. Their legs need to go out to the side. Fortunately, we know that from the hips to the knee is about 1.5 heads. So we can use this knowledge to make it the right proportions. We have to imagine in our head, where are the hips at? Maybe that hip joint is right here. And if we go in this direction for the leg, we just say 1 head and 1/2 heads. This should be the knee right about there. And then again, from the knee down to the ankles that's the 1/2 head, that's the whole head. So again, 1.5 heads. And maybe the legs are, I think we need to bend them down a bit more, like this maybe. So from that knee we go another 1.5 heads, and there's our ankles. And we know the feet are another 1/2 head, like that. Just kind of tie things together. And we can draw a person that's still in proportion, but that is doing something totally different. Our arms, we know, line up with the belly button more or less, the elbow does. So if we imagine the arms start here. Here's our armpits. So our arms start here. There's the curve of the back. The neck comes down like this and gives us some shoulders here. So from this shoulder joint to the belly button is about how long the elbow is going to be. So we can just capture that measurement right here, and then we can adjust it to wherever the arm needs to be. So if I want the arm to be kind of out to here, I can do that, and it'll be that long till the elbow. And then we know that the wrists would go down to about where the hip joint is, but we're going to go all the way down to this head right here. It wasn't actually as much the hip joint as it was that head measurement, the extra head. So if the arms were to go straight from here to here, this part of the arm would be that long. And then we got our hand on the end there. We can draw in the muscles as kind of circular masses, adjust as needed. Draw out all the outline shapes. Ovals, 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 friends. The foot is angled downward. We need the chest to be able to fit a whole rib cage in there, so we make sure that's big enough. The belly's going to be kind of squished and poking out there as you lean in forward. And we have the general outline of a person who's pretty proportionate. I think the arms got a little long on this, so it's important to be able to spot it and say, hold on a second, that looks a little weird. So we can shrink in those arms a bit. But by using this head measurement tool and then just making adjustments as you go, you could do people in all kinds of positions, and they're not going to have humongous heads or scrawny limbs or whatever. They're going to have pretty human proportions to them. So go ahead and try that with the head that you have, with a head model, and see what you come up with.